just imagine or empathize with the psychopath. I have no value if I die, I don't care. Versus if someone else dies, I don't care because they have no value. That's different. And you would not survive in corporate with the mindset like that.
Hi, this is your project management cowboy coming back to you with another podcast. In this podcast, we are going to talk about personality assessment tests. Why? Because I had the fortunate opportunity with a client and with some colleagues of mine to take part in one of these personality tests. I'm going to tell you which one, and I'm going to show you what psycho results I got. A joke aside, this has always been a topic that has been of interest to me because every once in a while a client will come to me and say, listen, we need to develop our teams. Is there any way to assess them? So that's kind of the motivation behind this. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of literature available on Amazon if you go out there and see what's out there. So what I'd like to do in this podcast that's following up with Karina, Olivier, we're going to be talking about a specific personality test that we were actually trained in, but I also want to give you kind of introduction to what's out there because we're not really promoting one system or the other. So let's get ahead of it. Personality profile tests, okay? Interesting fact, supposedly there's about 2,500 different ones out there right now. Now that doesn't make it all the more easier. I'm going to make it easy for you. I'm going to give you the short list. There's about 6 or 7 of the big boys and girls that we're going to take a look at. They're primarily used in a business setting for hiring process, for developing teams, for developing training programs. That's kind of the motivation behind it, okay? They're supposed to give you kind of a unique insight. They're supposed to kind of accelerate the process when you're interviewing someone or you're giving a 360 feedback. They're kind of supposed to set the tone, create a framework, create a vocabulary in which to discuss the basic capabilities and orientations of individuals, okay? Like I said, they're used very strongly for job seeking, and Psychology Today reports that about 80% of Fortune 500 companies use some form of these one way or the other. I will say this though, I recently picked up on Instagram somebody from an Ivy League university in the United States, and they questioned him about these personality tests, and he says, you know what? When I was doing my MBA and I was doing my PhD, there's not a lot of conversation about this in the academic world, which is interesting, but still in the business world, this comes up quite often. What is the purpose of the test? A quick assessment, a kickstart to constructive conversation. This is kind of my definition, and I like this definition because this was my experience when I did when I was doing my certification for the personality test that we're going to take a look at later. I had to actually assess somebody based on their results. And I thought the greatest thing about it was that it gives you kind of a head start. It gives you a kind of some homework to get into before you sit down with a person. It's not 100% indicative of what the person is really like, but it gives you a ground to start off with and actually ask more questions than to make determinations, okay? It helps you with hiring decision. It helps you with coaching and mentoring. It helps you develop capability development plans for individuals or for teams. It's great for team building. We're going to take a look at one particular one that I'm also familiar with, the Belbin test, which is great for assessing teams. It's great for leadership development and mentoring. And it's also great for personal growth. I think it's sometimes valuable to take a look at your own personality test. And I think the greatest value to individuals is to reflect, does this really reflect, does this resonate with me? Is this accurate? Okay, because there are some cases where it might not, okay? Disclaimer, there's always a disclaimer with this thing. There's 2 terms that are always used in personality tests, and one of them is called validity and the accuracy. These are 2 scientific terms that are used. Now, you might find this interesting, but if your psychological profile that you're using has an accuracy of about 30%, that is considered fairly high, okay? There's a number of different variables that affect validity and accuracy, but we'll take a look at that a little bit later on. What also has a big result is the environment that you're working in. I think anybody who's ever taken one of these personality tests several times will know that through the history of your career, your profile might change depending on what type of job you're working with, what the culture of your company is, whether you're working in a dynamic or critical or stressful environment. All of these things kind of play a role. The semantic understanding of the questions that are asked to be able to assess you are also a big thing, right? We'll take a look at that a little bit later on as well. Culture has a role, and your present life conditions we've already talked about. Tests can mislead. They're not an absolute 100% bullseye of what's going on in your life, but they're a great place to start a conversation from. Another thing I'd like to say is remember that people can change and evolve. And this is the last point is very, very important. A test does not test whether you are a good person or a bad person. It doesn't necessarily test whether you're a good employee or a bad employee. It takes a look at your preferences. It takes a look at how you perceive your role in the world. But it's not so much a judgment, which I think is really, really important to say, okay? I have, of the 2,500 that are out there, picked out the big boys and girls, okay? I had ChatGPT help me with this, right? So Myers-Briggs indicator, also called MBTI, classic. A lot of American companies use this, a lot of multinational companies use this. This is a big one. Interesting enough, in the conversation that we're going to have with Karina later on, she's going to point out that the ones that have the greatest scientific relevance and validity are ones that are primarily based on this model right here, which is called the Big Five personality test. You might be familiar with the book, The Big Five, okay? We'll take a look at that, also called Ocean. Then there's DISC assessment. We have the Belbin. I'm going to add two that maybe you're not so familiar with. One, which we are going to have a podcast with an expert in a couple weeks from now, is called the Process Communication Model. I really like this one because it's kind of pragmatic. And then the one we're going to take a look at in the actual podcast that's coming up is the Personality and Preference Inventory, also called PAPI, okay? Now I might need to intone the I there. PAPI, it's not a Latino personality test. It's a broad across all cultures. I thought that was funny. I thought I'd throw that in. I used to work in Miami, so shout out to my Cuban friends in Miami. Okay, let's start off with MBTI, Myers-Briggs. A lot of you might have heard of this before. Let's give you a real rough overview of what it is. It's one of the most popular ones. I've already mentioned that. And it basically assesses personality types based on competing inclinations that you might have. One, are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? Are you more a person that is sensing? Okay, so kind of the rational approach, or do you use intuition more? Are you more a thinker or a feeler, which might be a little bit redundant with this? Are you more a judger? So are you good at dissecting what's right and wrong, one and zeros, yes and no? Are you more the judging type or more the perceiving type? Good. Used to understand teams, team dynamics, communication styles, and personal development, but pretty much all of these models have that ambition. Let's see what we are. Big Five. This is, strangely enough, this is kind of the framework of frameworks, okay? This is probably one of the simplest ones. It breaks down the assessment of personalities based on openness to experience, kind of that introvert, extrovert from a different perspective. Conscientiousness. Conscientiousness, for those whose mother tongue is not English, means do you follow the rules, your own rules or the rules that are given? Do you follow procedures? Are you conscientious? Are you aware of what's going on around you? Extroversion, agreeableness, and I found this is very interesting, the concept of neuroticism. I'm not going to go into details. It's a psychological term. You can look it up. But we all have some of these variables. By the way, there's no such thing as being just one or the other. All of us are kind of a mix. And here you have kind of a wheel that shows you, are you more nervous or sensitive? Are you more secure or confident? Are you more innovative or curious, consistent? And here you have this wheel, okay? Once again, used for individuals and for team development. The other one, which is really, really big, is DISC, okay? DISC takes a little bit of a different approach. It has the color wheel, okay? And the four primary behaviors that are looked at are dominance. How dominant are you as a leader or a manager? Do you work with influence? How steady or reliable are you? And once again, the word conscientiousness. You'll see that a lot of these models borrow vocabulary or lean on one another, okay? What does DISC help individuals understand? Behavior in the team settings, improve communication, and to build a more effective working relationship. Here you have, like I said, we might at a later time have somebody who's an expert on this who we'll bring in, but this is just a quick review. And we'll put this PowerPoint or the PDF in the link as well so you can download it if you like it. Now, this is one of my favorite ones because it was one of the first that I was exposed to. I like Belbin because Belbin doesn't assess your personality for the sake of assessing your personality. It assesses your personality to see how you fit into a team. I think this is a brilliant concept. Anybody who's ever worked in a team knows at the beginning of a team cycle, there's usually a lot of euphoria. Part of the euphoria is because you're thinking about new ideas, and the diversity of a group makes things exciting. Brainstorming, right? It's exciting. When you get into execution, that can become a little bit cumbersome and get on your nerves, and we go from the forming to the storming phase for this exact same reason. But the underlying principle behind the Belbin principle is that you need to be aware of do you have the right composition of a team? Do you have different players? Because you don't need, if you've got 9 people in your team, you don't need 9 of the same people. So let's take a look at the distinct 9 roles. You can like these terms or not. I don't think they're great. There's the plant, right? There's the monitor and evaluator. There's the specialist. There's the shaper, the mover and shaker. There's the implementer. There's the completer and the finisher. There's a coordinator. There's a team worker. And there's a resource investigator. Now, I don't always like these terminologies they use. They're kind of a little fanciful and not always easy to understand. You can look up what they mean behind them. There's a lot of overlap between the different personality trait models. But if you do this test, it'll give you a breakdown and it'll tell you, do you have the right mix for your team depending on the context of your endeavor that you're looking at. Okay? Now, these 9 roles are usually broken down into three overriding roles, which is, are you in the thinking role? Are you in the action-oriented role? Or are you more of a people person? Interesting, right? It's kind of a good overview. What it's meant to do is help you understand team dynamics, enhance your team performance, and make sure you have the right composition. Great concept, okay? Good. This is one that's very strong in Europe, although I don't believe it comes originally from Europe. Once again, here, there has to be some kind of categorization. We go with 6 distinct personality types, okay? Let's see what their vocabulary is. They have the persister, right? The one that gets things done. You have the promoter, which is kind of the cheerleader. You have the rebel, also called the omega sometimes, the person who pushes back, the devil's advocate, right? You have the imaginer, which is kind of the creative person. You have the harmonizer who makes sure the team gets along. Why don't we all get along, right? And then you have the thinker. These are the different types. Each type has their own motivational needs, behaviors, and communication style. This is why it's called a process communication, which means if you can evaluate what type your team member is of these 6, then you can tailor the way you communicate to them. And this might resonate with some of you. If you think about, you talking to an IT specialist or to an accountant or to a marketing person or to an engineer, you know this intuitively. You have to kind of adjust the way you communicate and what you communicate to them, right? So this is important. Once again, is intended to improve communication and relationships at work. What I like about PCM, and if you ask anybody who uses PCM actively, they kind of like to arm's length push themselves away from the personality types. Yes, they have a questionnaire in the beginning, and yes, they evaluate your personality model, but it's much more forward-thinking in the psychology of how do you use it on a daily basis. It goes way beyond evaluation, and we're going to later on this month have 1 or 2 specialists who's going to come in and tell us their use case examples for PCM, okay? What are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about PAPI, right? Which stands for Personality and Preference Inventory, okay? Here you have a very sexy wheel that kind of shows you how one of these assessments is. By the way, if you're wondering if this is a John Smith or Jane Doe, no, this is actually me. You can see what kind of psycho I am on this wheel. Just kidding. What it basically has is it has a framework that deals with how is your composure, what is your orientation when it comes to engagement, What is your impact or drive motivation? What is your focus on organization and structure? How are you with ideas and change? How are you in interaction with others? And what is your work momentum? Now, each one of these have subsegments, which are broken into what we call perceived roles versus needs, okay? So let's pick some of them out. In here we have the need to be direct. I want to point this out. I have a score of 10. Now some of you might be applauding and say, yay, Mark, you have a need to be direct, you get 10 points. But this is not the Eurovision. You don't win by getting 10. The idea is that there's a medium that you're looking for, and that is somewhere around 5.5, which is this circle right here. We'll see that in just a little bit. And anything that's way below that or way above that gives you ground for discussion. So you can see whoever has to deal with me has a good starting point to have a real good conversation. Mark, what kind of environment are you in that you feel that you have to be completely direct? Versus that's a need, and over here's a role. My role is as far as how do I feel about me having to be emotionally restrained. I'm a project cowboy. I don't have to be restrained very often, or maybe I do. I'm down here too. So here you have two contrasting things, which is once again a great grounds for conversation. We'll jump over this. Let's take a look at this this is a little bit more complicated, but since we're going to talk about it in the podcast, I want you to have a rudimentary understanding of once you get in. There are two tests that you take when you take the PAPI. One of them is called the Ipsative, which is based on your preferences. So what you're given is you're given a test that asks you to look at 3 different of these needs or preferences and asks you which one has priority. Okay? And sometimes you struggle with it because you say, well, either none of them are important to me or all of them are or some of them are important to me, but it forces you to take a pick because it kind of goes beyond that process of letting you know where you at home. Okay? This is pretty much gives you an overview of what your preference is, and this is not really the primary circle that's used. The primary circle that's used, but we'll take a look at this. So Ipsative, here you have it broken down. We have kind of opened up the wheel that you can see. You can see once again engagement, impact, drive, and organization. That's half of the wheel, and you can see my score for whatever that's worth. Once again, it gives you an indication of where my preferences lie. Not exactly what I do, but where my preferences lie. Here, the next part of the wheel, ideas and change, interaction, work momentum, and composure. You can see here we've got a little bit more erratic display, a great ground for a coach to dig into, okay? So let's take a look at the normative. Now let's understand what normative means. When I was taking the course for PAPI, one of the participants said, you know what, how valid can this be and how reliable can this be? Because this should vary. Your personality type should vary based on whether you're an engineer, an IT person, or a marketing person, or the type of project or the type of culture you're in, or maybe even the country that you're in. And that's what's great about the organization that's behind this PAPI profile. What they do is they have, I think, over 250,000 results in a database, which allows you to select based on your location, your cultural background, your education, and your job, your normative group. What does normative group mean? It means you're not compared to all 250,000 or 500,000 people, respondents that they have, but they select that group and say, compare to them, what is your distribution look like? Okay? A little bit complex, but it's an interesting concept. Once again, if we roll this out, okay, this is my distribution over engagement. I'm into motivation, right? I have the need to be upwardly supportive. So I'm a little bit above the average here. I have a high work focus. I have a need to achieve. I hope so. I'm persistent. I have a need to influence. I have even a higher need to lead. Doesn't necessarily say I lead because I feel that it's my right or I'm entitled to it. It could be because I feel that the environment that I'm in, if I don't lead, nobody else will, right? And then you can see a little bit of a dip here in need to be noticed, a little bit less, which I would agree with. Need to be organized, also a little bit less. Now you might say, this is about average. You might say, well, shouldn't that be higher if you're a consultant for project management? It depends on what kind of project you're in. If you're in agile environments, it'll be a little bit lower, okay? If you compare to the Ipsative, you can see that there is a difference that's worth discussion. We're going to talk about a little bit on the podcast. And here's the second part of the wheel. Here you see I'm way up in the upper ranges. Doesn't mean it's good. Remember, when you take this test, you'll get a series of different test results that will ask you questions to assess whether this is a good indicator or what the trade-off or downside of it might be. Here, once again, an example of the Ipsative. You can see the difference between this one right here. The first part of the wheel, there's quite a big divergence, but when you come to the second half of the wheel, and you can also indicate if both Ipsative and Normative are close to one another, it gives you a kind of indication this is where you might want to put some of your focus, right? Once again, all outliers, anything that's a little bit more extreme, are not necessarily red flags, but they are a flag, okay? So we have to put some kind of flag here. Well, let's put a blue flag, right? So this would be our blue flag. If I'm going to have a conversation with somebody, I wouldn't go in there and say, hey, I've got Rico, Nelly here. Nelly, what the hell's wrong with you? I wouldn't say that. What I would say is, Nelly, you've taken a look at your results? And she'll say, yes, right? Yes. And then I'll say, what stuck out to you? And she might say, yeah, I might. By the way, this is a good example, right? Because she's an absolute social harmonizer, right? And I'll say, do you concur with that? And she goes, absolutely, that's me. I say, well, it's way above the norm. And she might say, yes. I say, are there certain conditions where you feel that this is really important? And she might say, yes. And then she'll give me examples. And then I'll say, well, is there a trade-off for you? Are you sensing burnout, right? Or are you feel like you're lacking something in the support? So this is not an absolute statement of who you are and that's it. You don't have any choice in the conversation. It's meant to encourage a 360 conversation, which means I ask questions, you answer them, you give me feedback, I ask you more questions. It's a great framework for discussion and exchange. I hope I've created a little bit of a basis for you to go into the podcast. We're going to have a great conversation with Karina. She's a psychologist who specialized in this and has an education in this, and she works for a company called Talogy that does this PAPI personality test. Listen to what she has to say, and then choose for yourself which model might be interesting for you. Like I said, we're going to have some follow-up podcasts where we take a look at some of the other models, but this one's an introduction to PAPI. Enjoy. Hi, this is your project management cowboy coming right back at you with our next podcast. We are going to be talking today about personality models. Did I say that correct? I've got a guest who's listening in, a professional.
Personality in general, yes.
Yeah, personality in general. Which means I'm sure you're familiar. There's different types out there. I've been told there's somewhere up to 20 out there. We're going to be talking about the PAPI diagram and the PAPI methodology. And I've got a sensational guest who's an expert in this area, a psychologist in the area, Mrs. Karina Olivier. Did I say it correctly?
Yes.
Okay, great. Purpose of this podcast will kind of be to delve into the subject matter. If you're a leader and you've got a team out there, or you're an HR person and you're trying to recruit people, one of the things that we're always tempted to doing is seeing, is there some kind of framework that we can use to quickly assess people and create a grounds for discussion, and also know where their potential development might lead. So let's jump right in. Karina, first question I always kind of like to ask right up front, how do we know each other?
We have had the pleasure to meet through a certification training for the PAPI. Was it last week?
Yeah, it was last week. It's pretty recent. So we don't know each other well, but I think I left a lasting negative impression. And during the process, I said, you know what? I was kind of critical and skeptical when I went into the course, but I saw a lot of things that I liked. My first thought was, you know, this doesn't just interest me. This probably interests a bunch of other business people I know who've always been wondering what's out there. I will say up front, one of the things that I've noticed, I use Amazon quite often to buy my books. I have several times sat down and tried to find the different personality models that are out there, and there's almost no books in Amazon. I don't know if that's your experience, but that's my experience. And I always thought it was kind of weird and strange. And I just wanted to jump at the chance to have somebody in our podcast who actually knows what the heck she's talking about. More than that, you're not just a salesperson in the subject matter. You're actually a psychologist. You're a trained psychologist, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
yeah. Well, thank heaven for us. So let's jump right in. Tell us a little bit about your background. You've got a very interesting background. So go ahead and tell us where you come from and how you got into this field of work.
Yep. I'm from the deep south, so not Texas, the deep south, South Africa. So all the way to the bottom.
Actually, isn't it Namibia though?
My family is from Namibia, so Namibia is right next to South Africa. Yeah. If you look at the map, Africa, South Africa, Namibia is right next to it. The Namib Desert is in it as well. My family are from Namibia, German-speaking Namibians. After the second, it used to be this is I want to retake.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, let me start again. I am originally from South Africa, with my family coming from Namibia. So I am first generation South African, also German-speaking. My parents are from Namibia, and Namibia used to be a German colony, one of the few, Deutsch Südwestafrika, and continued speaking German. So I'm a German-speaking Namibian South African who now lives in the Netherlands.
The best combination,
or years ago. Yeah, so I'm a global citizen. People have told me, I think, speak English, German, Afrikaans, learning a little bit of Dutch as well now, so picking that up quite quickly, and have had the pleasure actually to grow up in a really rich cultural environment, and being then also trained as a psychologist and a psychometrist has given me lots of colorful insights into people in general and the experience around that. Happy to share.
Standard question we have to ask all psychologists.
Yes.
Why did you study psychology?
I have a story for that, actually. I was always a social researcher. So when I look back, when I was a kid as well, I used to run around and ask everyone the same question just to see if there are differences. Fascinated me, and I don't know why, but it is the way I am. And there was a girl I was friends with in high school, and she used to cut herself. So in her palm, she used to cut herself, and I didn't understand it. And it made me sad, but it intrigued me on what would push someone to do that to themselves. That is then when I started in social work, went into clinical psychology, and then slowly moved over into organizational industrial psychology. So yeah, it's been a long journey, but I'm fascinated by people and how different they are and what drives them. And then the more you work with people, the more you see the similarities as well, and what pushes and pulls us. And that's where my passion is.
So right from the get-go, you were certain that's what the direction that your psychological studies were going to go.
I thought clinical psychology, and then I changed my mind into organizational.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. You studied in South Africa?
Yes.
Okay. So go ahead.
South Africa is quite heavily regulated when it comes to psychology. So now moving here, I see different countries are different. The regulation around South Africa is strongly influenced by what happened with psychometric testing now for the subject matter in specific, specifically talking about psychometric testing, stems from the apartheid and how it's been badly used to disadvantage main groups. So we have very strong laws to govern psychometric testing. It needs to be valid, reliable, non-biased, and fair. And whatever we say as psychologists has to be defensible in court. So when I look at personality assessments, I look at it through that lens too. And I know exactly what happens when it's badly used. And I'm really glad about this opportunity to talk about that.
I think, isn't that field called originally eugenics, or am I picking up the wrong word there from my vocabulary?
I'm not sure.
I know that also Central Europe has had a historically bad run with that form of psychology or pseudoscience. It wasn't really psychology. But I think that's great that you mentioned that. So the very fact that South Africa has also some dark history there gave you an even more solid foundation for watching out that whatever you do is legitimate. You've used the word a couple times, psychometrics. For those of us who don't know what that is, tell us what that is.
Psychometrics talks about psychometric assessments. And when someone tells you something is a psychometric tool, they're talking about this tool has psychometric properties. Mm-hmm. And psychometric properties are that it's valid, reliable, fair, non-biased. So these four, those are the main things that we're looking at in psychometrics. So if someone's telling you, use my psychometric tool, you should be able to ask them, okay.
Question.
Give me some data on that. Yeah.
There's a number of them. How many? I think somebody recently told me there's up to 20 different ones, maybe even more.
20 different psychometric tools?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, in the hundreds.
Hundreds, really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
What are some of the big ones that most people might? Enneagram, I think, is one of them, right?
If we're talking about personality alone,
yeah.
There's different buckets in psychometrics or psychometric testing. See that a psychometric tool measures a psychological construct. And psychological constructs are either personality, problem solving, and integrity.
Okay.
If we just look on personality tools, there are two main different models of personality that we're working with. So either we're working with the Ocean, which is the acronym for the Big Five, or we're working with the type indicators like the MBTI. You get the JTI, which is a spin-off from that. Then you also get the Enneagram, but often not seen as a personality tool because it looks at different aspects. So I wouldn't really see that as a personality measure at all. No.
Now, I'm American, so I've had some exposure, some bureaucratic exposure, some military exposure, some American corporate exposure to some of these models. One of the questions I saw recently in a podcast that I was watching, I also watch podcasts, was the discussion of the legitimacy of some of these models. Would you like to share any of your thoughts there? How does one know if one of these psychometric models is legitimate or?
It's a very good question. There's a huge bucket. There's a huge bucket to unload there. I think a lot of them are legitimate, but not used legitimately. So there's that one problem. And then the other one is, again, you look for the psychometric properties of the tool. Okay. There's a minimum range that a psychometric tool has to meet with regards to reliability and validity.
We last week we kind of went through it, right? We looked at I think it was called the validity score, and what was the second one again?
Reliability.
The reliability.
So a lot of companies come and say, yeah, but my tool has very high levels of reliability. Reliability is how reliable is the tool. But if you look at the statistics, as soon as you put it online, it automatically becomes reliable because the user experiences the tool exactly the same over and over again. Mm-hmm. So once I put a tool from paper pencil, when we moved onto online, the reliability scores went up. So because the instructions are always the same, the environment mostly is always the same, the outcome's always the same. So that's almost guaranteed. That's why when someone goes, oh, look at our reliability score, I go, good for you. Is it online? Yes. Okay. Of course, it's going to be high. The score that you should be really interested in is the validity score. Okay. Validity means, is it testing what it's supposed to be testing, and how well does it do so? So
now, what's the range for the validity score? From 1 to?
We go in point scores for validity. Anything from 0.4 upwards is acceptable. And if you look at what that actually means, it means that up to 40%, you should be able to predict what you want to predict.
So you have a score. You have a score of like 1 to 10 or 0 to 100. And if you're at 40%, which is an interesting thing that I picked up in our discussion last week, if you're at 40%, you're already in the better range of models for this. Is that correct?
Yes. So let's take a scale of assertiveness, for example. If you can predict assertiveness as a behavior up to 40% of the time, then it has psychometric properties. Yeah. And I think once I learned that, I thought, is that it?
Yeah, 40 doesn't sound like a lot, does it?
Yeah. So I'm not a professor, and I'm sure many people will go, actually, it's this score, but in general, it's around 0.4 for most of the psychometric tools that I've seen. And then it all depends on which context it's used. So to increase the validity, you actually need to make it pretty context specific for its use. And if you can do that, then through that, you increase the validity of the tool. So a blanket tool for all, is not something that I would recommend. Context needs to be taken in consideration, job, roles, environment, culture, as much as possible, and the need, and then start basing decisions on that, because the baseline isn't very strong when it comes to personality assessments.
Okay. You said two things that I kind of want to repeat back, because, and maybe get your feedback if I heard you correctly. One thing that you mentioned is that a lot of these models might have a applicatory value within a certain setting, but the question are they being used correctly? So that's kind of it's good to have a hammer, but if you don't know how to use it, it doesn't do you a lot of good, or you use it at the wrong time.
Or your fingers. Yes.
And then the other thing that you kind of mentioned it, which increases the validity score, is kind of, I guess, also how regularly you use it, whether it becomes part of your, whether you just use it one time. I'm sure the validity score might be a little bit lower, but if it's something you use continually, both the subject, the people that are using it, and from both sides, the people who are taking the test and the people who are analyzing the test, I'm guessing the validity score will probably go up.
It shouldn't, not from a psychometric point of view. I think the output or the impact that it has isn't part of the validity score. Okay. It's just the validity really talks about how predictive is this tool. Okay. And what you do with that prediction and the next steps can't be measured, not really.
Okay. Well, you said there's hundreds of models out there. Let's talk about the model that I've asked you to introduce, and that is the PAPI model, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you work for a company that provides this exclusively, right? Name of your company, I've already asked you, but I'm going to have you pronounce it so I don't mispronounce it. Talogy, is that correct? Did I say
Talogy? That's
Talogy.
Correct, yeah.
So Talogy, I guess you were saying, stands for talent and technology put together?
Yes.
Originally an American-based company, but international at the moment?
It is. We are a global company. We're an international company. I work in the Benelux DACH region at the moment, which we have APAC and LATAM and the US. And the US is the biggest base at the moment for Talogy.
And your focus, your clients that you focus on are primarily business, is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Global businesses and international businesses. So all the tier 1 clients. Yeah.
Okay. And you use the PAPI model to do what with them?
Oh gosh, a few things.
Please.
They're social researchers, so easy to scratch around a little. No,
okay.
I'm joking. There are a few things that we use it for. So there's two perspectives when it comes to consulting and using it, one the live side and one the digital side. I had the digital side, but from a live perspective, PAPI can be used for personal development, for coaching, for selection, for sift and select solutions. So really just like a broad blanket assessment to see who are the ones that would maybe fit this role the best. Leadership development used a lot, but that I think is because that's what we specialize in. And talent, from a talent perspective, I've used it for conflict resolution when people are fighting with each other. Mm-hmm. But all in all, the baseline of it is to increase self-awareness of the candidate in whatever setting that is. That's the aim of the tool, is to increase self-awareness about your behavior.
And it's in your name. The technology part is that you have your tests online and you have your assessment, and all of that is kind of automated, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Our reports are automated, but we do bespoke solutions, bespoke reports, etc., link it to leadership profiles and values for companies. So we do go all the way into the bespoke lane, and that's usually where I get involved as well.
Now, for those people out there who've never heard of PAPI before, what makes you stand out or makes you better than the other ones? Why should somebody who's listening to this podcast say, I'm going to reach out to Talogy and ask them? By the way, this is not a sponsored podcast. Okay. This is just pure interest on my part. What makes you guys good or better than others?
Yeah. Look, I'm going to be completely honest. There are really great tools out there, and I've used many of them. What makes us different is how we see the scales a little bit differently than others. So our competition will also bring in value stronger, or focus more on the big 5. We've split the big 5 into 7 areas, for example. So we broadened it a bit, but our focus is on the needs and roles part of the personality profile. And if we go a little bit back into the history of personality profiling, which is also interesting, is that the big 5, to my understanding, has been developed to standardize testing for personality so that different psychologists can use that to come back to a baseline to compare results with each other. If we didn't have a baseline, then all the research would never talk to each other and we could never compare and do...
There would be no comparability.
Liability studies, really.
You've mentioned the big 5 a couple times, and you've said you've expanded it to 7. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What are the big 5?
The ocean profile, the oldest theory that we base everything on. There is a good discussion about, should this be redone? What are people saying about the big 5? Is that even a personality, etc.? But that's, I think, a discussion for a different stage. But we are working with the baseline of the big 5, which was developed.
And most
60s.
of the big accepted models work with the big 5, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like you cannot develop a personality tool without forming it on the big 5, because you need to prove retest, not just test retest reliability, but does it measure the same thing as other tools do? And if all the other tools are based on the big 5, yours is going to eventually be based on that as well. Mm-hmm. So the big 5 talks about, and we call it the ocean because that's the acronym for the big 5, mm-hmm. which is openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Okay.
You hear neuroticism and you go, ooh, that's not good, right?
Well, if you're familiar with The Path Less Traveled, which is a book I read a million years ago, neuroticism is actually one of the things that he talks about. So I don't have a negative connotation, but I think for people who've not heard of it in a positive context, they might say, oh, I'm not neurotic. But neuroticism is part of everybody's personality profile in one form or the other. Yeah. Similar to narcissism, without being a full-blown narcissist, everybody has narcissistic traits. So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have this ocean model, and you've added 2 more. What are the 2 more that you guys added?
So we haven't added 2 more. We split the big 5 into our 7 areas, which I wrote somewhere, and now I can't find them. Give me 1 second. You can edit this part out, please.
edit.
1 second. Sorry, I can't find it now.
Should I screen share with one of the models?
Yes, please.
Hold on. I was a master pupil, Streber, and I've done some preparation.
No, thank you. I've got it here as well. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep.
Does that help?
Yep. Okay. So the big 5 we split into the 7 areas.
So let's do a lead in again so that we can splice this in then. Okay. Let me just do a quick intro. So for all the participants, so that we don't want to make this conversation too abstract, just listening to 2 people talk. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of visualization. And I thought it would be hilarious if I did one of these tests last week, and I figured I'm going to be the test bunny for this conversation. I thought we would pull up my 2 wheels, and that we kind of use these 2 models for you to kind of explain in greater depth what we're looking at, what the value is. And then we can also talk about how I've also printed out some of the other reports that are generated, which I thought were really, really impressive. And then we might use those as a ground for conversation. Okay. So we left off with the big 5 and how you split them down. It's all you.
Yeah. So the researchers have split them into 7 areas, which you see outside of the wheel. So engagement, motivation, and drive, creativity, and change, etc. This is now in German, which is also fine. Organization and structure, etc. So those 7 areas are the big 5, where 2 have been split into more areas. So motivation and drive, for example, introversion versus extroversion, as well as engagement, temperament is neuroticism, etc. So you can see the links to the big 5 to the PAPI wheel.
Now, what's really going to be interesting and confusing for people who are not familiar with your model is you have basically this wheel here, which is what you have here is a spider diagram, basically scores individuals on a scale of, in this case, on the I profile circle that you have from 0 to 10, and then on your N model, which our listeners are not going to understand right now, but they will in a little bit, goes from 1 to 10. And you basically do is you score people on this scale. And as you can see here, you have a spider diagram. In this case, the little gray circle that I've added in there kind of shows the mean where the score would be. Let's take a step back, because this is something that's very unique with you guys. You guys use this wheel twice in the evaluation. You have an online test that you can take. I, by the way, you can see up there, did this test in 21 minutes and 38 seconds. Does that make me a psychopath that I did it so quickly, or?
Look, Mark, I've actually worked with psychopaths and
No?
no.
Thanks. I just wanted to get a clean bill of health. But we did talk about this last week. Is there a kind of a guideline on how long you should be taking to take this test?
For the Ipsative version, around 20 minutes.
Okay, so I'm 1 minute
over.
over.
Version around 15, so okay. I think you're good.
Okay.
The time also gives me an indication on what happened, or will give me a little bit of a flag. If it's too long, then I'm going to ask, oh, I see that you took 60 minutes. What happened during the assessment? Okay. There's two things that I can draw from that. Either the person was distracted and came back and there was a good explanation, or yes, but I also did emails and phone calls and that already talks about behavior, which then I can pick up as well.
Now, let's open up the conversation here and to kind of keep it structured for our listeners so they don't get lost. PAPI has two wheels. They use the same wheel in two different colors, but with two different assessments. One's the Ipsative, which most people are not going to understand, and one's the Normative. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
The Ipsative, this is the Ipsative, this is the I profile, and if we jump ahead, this right here, hold on, went back, this would be the Normative.
Yeah.
What the heck? What's the difference?
So we need to take one step back, Mark.
Okay.
One step back.
Sure.
Okay. When there are a lot of test publishers actually bring in Ipsative versions of their assessments, except that with Talogy and the PAPI, there are two distinct profiles and we pulled them apart. So what that means is the Ipsative version does not have a comparison on one group, and we are asking you questions and we're going to ask you to rank order the importance of the statements. That then tells me and gives me a wheel of what is important to you versus what's less important to you. It doesn't mean that the other scales you do not have a preference for. Mm-hmm. It just means that the ones that are very high are more important, or have almost won the race in the assessment. Mm-hmm. You clicked on it more and you chose it more, and therefore it is important to you. So the PAPI, the Ipsative version, we use only for development, really great for career exploration exercises, because I can ask you here already, need to communicate directly. Ease in decision making is high and important.
I'll go if you want, because I did this last week as well, and it helped me. This might help for the viewer to understand what we're looking at. I had to break it down into two slides. So here you have the wheel broken down a little bit bigger, also in English, so that our viewers can figure it out. If we were to look at the Ipsative. And by the way, this is me. So if anybody wants to know who the psycho is or the non-psycho that's being evaluated here, I've volunteered. So maybe run down, explain to us the difference between a role and a need, because you can see that in each one of these areas, ocean areas, right? They're broken down into sub-factors. If you see it in italics and in blue, so if you look over at engagement, you have inspirational, motivator, and work focus. Those are how I perceive my role. Is that correct?
Yes. The needs are things that motivate and drive us. Okay. Those things are quite close to us. I would even say sometimes even attached to our values. Mm. The needs are not going to change over time because these things motivate and drive us. They give us energy. But we want to create that. We want to create an understanding. So the needs of the ones in italics need to be upwardly supportive, need to achieve, need to influence. So that's my internal motivation. Is that correct? Yeah, those things motivate and drive you positively or negatively, depending. If you don't have your needs realized and there's a strong preference for those, then you experience need frustration, for example.
And the other ones, those are roles, right? So inspirational, motivator, work focus, persistence, leadership role, planner, attention to details. Those are more functional based characteristics. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's a bit more to that. They're your self-perception of your ability and preference in these areas.
Okay, so what I lean towards.
No, how you think you do.
Oh, okay. So that's what the Ipsative does. It's kind of a self-reflection. What do you think about yourself, right?
For the Ipsative and normative version, the scales are exactly the same, except the Ipsative will force you to choose what is most
You
important.
have to set
to you.
priorities.
I'm really looking at what's interesting for you here or not. The Ipsative shouldn't be used for anything else than that.
Okay. Now, with the Ipsative, the mean, if we're going to look at it on the bell curve, would be 5, correct?
There is no average when it comes to the Ipsative. Because there can only be a mean score if there's a normal distribution,
Okay.
and a normal distribution in the middle is the
so
5.
we're not comparing this to any groups. This is purely on itself. But we still use 5 kind of as the middle as an orientation. I guess the line is useless there.
As a personal orientation.
So we have an astrological sign here going from inspirational motivator. I have a 4. Need for upwards to be upwardly supportive. I have a 3, 6, 6, 6. What does this tell us? What does somebody like yourself who's experienced with this kind of model, when you look at this, what can you derive from this?
When it comes to the PAPI Ipsative version, the ones that we look at first are the outliers, the high interest ones. And why did they win for you? And I would start exploring that for you, like work focus, need to achieve, need to influence, and leadership role. Just saying those out loud and in sequence already tells a story.
Okay.
So that's a bit more towards your brand. This is important to you. This gives you energy and drive, especially the need to achieve and need to influence, for example. If you cannot do that in your current role, you might get frustrated. And we, especially as psychologists or organizational psychologists, frustration can lead to all kinds of things in the workplace. And it's good to highlight these and to help people to reflect on that. I suppose the question over to you, what do you see?
That's a classical psychologist answer, right?
Classical psychologist.
That's actually, we consultants, we've taken over that question. Every time a client asks a good question, we say, that's a great question. What do you think? And then we send them they answer their own question, and then we send them a bill in the mail.
Yes.
No, but I understand.
People to reflect.
I do understand the value of asking somebody to self-reflect and put it into context, because these are data points, but they don't give you the full picture in the sense of why do I think this way, or what's going on in my work environment. And I think this is a general statement that can be made. A lot of these models will shift, although it's the same person, will shift over time based on time, maturity, and also the type of work we're working in, or?
Yes. Yeah.
So if I work if I'm working as an independent freelancer consultant, I probably will have a little bit of a different profile than if I was working at the post office. Nothing against the post office, and had a 9-to-5 job, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So this is.
There are some people that just cannot work for others. And if they do, they're constantly unhappy. The entrepreneurial profiles all kind of look similar.
But what we have here is, this is just half of the wheel, but we have it broken down again into the OSHA. So we have the engagement, impact, and drive, organizational, and structure. And then we have the sub-factors. Organizational and structures need to be organized, the concept of planning, attention to detail, need for rules and guidelines, need to finish. And then we go on to the second part, which is ideas and change. Although I did notice that the German translation and the English translation are not always close, but close enough. Interaction, work momentum, composure. And then we have the sub-factors, ideas and change. We've got conceptual thinker, need for change, need to belong to groups, which I thought was interesting, social harmonizer, need to relate closely to individuals. I thought that was interesting that it wasn't written in there, need to relate closely to others. It says to individuals. So it was a little bit more specific than to others. Ease in decision-making, work tempo. Now, if we look at this second, so we go back to the original, this is the first half of the Ipsative PAPI wheel. If we go to the second half, we've got more outliers here. So this should give you, this should make your eyebrows raise. When you look at this one, what does it tell you?
Yeah, those are the points that I would start with. Need to be direct, Mark.
Because I have a podcast. No, I actually, that one actually speaks to me. I think if you were to do the classical psychological question and ask me why that is, I could probably give you a lot of justifications for that. It has a lot to do with the nature of my project work. It has a lot to do with me having to integrate multiple hierarchical levels that are lost in translation. And the only way I get people to listen to me is if I'm often very, very direct, which is interesting, because if you look at need to be direct, the other one that's in contrast to it, right next to it, right, is the emotional constraint. I shared that with my wife. She thought that was funny. If you were to look at those two without asking me questions, what would be the questions that would come to mind, or what would be maybe some of the thoughts that you would have?
I need to keep in mind that this is the Ipsative PAPI, which means that emotional restraint might be low, but it just means that it's not as important as other things. So we need to make that distinction with the PAPI Ipsative. It means it's more important for you to be direct. It's more important to be.
So this is where I would like to be. Kind of my motivation.
Not necessarily. They're just more important than other skills.
Good.
The next step, and this, I think this would make some consultants and psychologists and coaches great versus you got a feedback and you're off. Is that research has shown now over and over again that we can reflect all we want, but if we don't make it actionable, nothing changes.
Yeah, now you open up a can of worms. I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges to all of these systems, and you kind of referred to it. We referred to it beforehand. If you use this model, but you don't use it, if you just use it to do a survey once and then don't follow up on it or do anything with it, it has marginal value. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe not that everybody's going to understand it right away. Maybe we should go to the second wheel, which is, I think, more indicative and we can get more out of, which is the N profile. Let's also kind of roll this out here. Now, in this case, there is a mean, correct?
Yes.
So
yes. Now there is an average there. Okay. There is a comparison.
Explain to us why there is a mean and you've mentioned it a couple times, these focus groups, I think you call them, that you have. Because I think that's a unique selling proposition that your company offers. Okay. So maybe explain the bell curve, and then we'll get to the norm groups.
Yeah. All psychometric tools should have a comparison group to some degree or other. So you could argue that the PAPI Ipsative does not have psychometric properties to be called a psychometric tool. It is a self-insightful tool. What's important to you or not? So the typical interest questionnaires as well, typically used for career assessment, interest coaching. That's fine, and it's very useful for that. But when it comes to psychometric properties, there are a few things that I need to check in the 4 things that I've mentioned in the beginning: validity, reliability, fairness, and non-bias. And you can only do that with a comparison group. So I want to know, A, what are your preferences? And B, what are your preferences if I compare you to a comparison group that is linked to your level? So if you are at director level, I'm going to use a norm group that has directors in it.
So let's make it simple.
Career, then it's going to be that norm group.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but do you know what a DAO is? DAO is an IT word that stands for the dumbest assumed user. And I always say that we consultants are master DAOs. So we ask all the stupid questions that nobody dares to ask. And one of the questions I would ask is just up front, what is the test group that both the Ipsative and the Normative have been exposed to? Are we talking 100, 1,000, 10,000? How many people? How many tests? Or what's the population of your test group?
Our test groups and our norm groups are very big. So our global norm group is over 100,000 strong. So it's huge. Yeah. The bigger norm group, the better. So
that's the big population. But then the brilliant thing that you do, and I don't want our losers to miss this, right? Is you say, well, I might say, but I'm a consultant. Or who are you comparing me? Are you comparing me to a mechanic? Or I'm a CEO. Who are you comparing me to? Are you comparing me to the accountant or the salesperson? Those are different personalities. You can't put me into the same bucket or into the same boat. So what you do is when you have people take the test, they have to say what level of management they're in, what their focus is. And with that capability you have of these hundreds of thousands of people that have taken the test, you have sub-norm groups so that I can compare myself to other consultants, for example, or an IT director can compare himself to or herself to another IT director in that case. Or you can do it by region, by country, right?
Yeah, we go a little bit broader. We don't go job-based specifically because each country IT is different.
Okay.
So coming from Africa, trust me, there's huge differences between countries, and you yourself have traveled and lived in different countries. So it's more country-based, so it's more culture-based, which is also part of something that we have to prove to make it psychometric. And complexity level based. So at what range or rank, dare I say rank, in the organization do you sit?
But the benefit of this is you increase your validity this way as well for the people who are looking at
yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
That, and what I really want to know, and if I were to do this with you, Mark, is where are your preferences versus a large number of people. And if I know that they are 1, 2, 3, so the bottom 15 percentile or 8, 9, 10, and I know compared to this huge number of people, this preference is really important to you. And then I know which buckets to open. So psychometric tests take this abstract idea of personality and it puts it on a piece of paper, gives us some tools to say, okay, I have an hour with you. Which buckets do I open and what information do I want to grab from this?
It gives you kind of a framework and some structure and a process and maybe a set of questions. And by the way, we'll take a look. I've printed out all these different reports and I was actually quite impressed. Some of them irritated me, but then they made me smile. We'll take a look at what I'm talking about in just a moment. So here we have the normative test. So it's basically the same questions, but we have a different reading, right? So if we were to compare, you have here what the Ipsative said and versus the normative, right? Now, what does that tell us? Does it tell us anything or does it not matter?
Can you go to the next slide? Do you see it on the other side as well?
Yeah, this is the second part of it. And this would be, here we're closer, which I thought was funny. It almost mirrors it, right?
Yeah.
So here we have.
I asked for the second slide because I want to know in the PAPI Ipsative there were strong outliers at the top.
Yeah.
Do they align with your normative or not?
Well, here they pretty much align, right? Okay. On core composure, there's a big bit of a gap. In work tempo, there might be a little bit of a gap. But there at least it looks like the same mountain range.
Yeah. Which could point towards a few different things. So if PAPI and N are completely different, then some things that are important to you don't really see as preferences at the workplace.
So here, for example, we have bigger differences.
But remember, the PAPI is forces you to choose what's important to you or not.
So for those who haven't taken the test, there's 2 tests. One test asks you to pick between 3 or 4 different things.
3. Yeah, I think.
Which forces you, when you're looking at 3 different hats, choose which one really has priority. And I remember taking the test. It's sometimes a little bit difficult to make a decision. You just have to suck it up and make the decision, which kind of forces you to to set a ranking of what's important to you. Whereas in the second test is more, how would you describe it?
It's your preference at the workplace. So it's your preferences with each of the buckets.
So it gives you a sentence and says how accurate this from 1 to 5, right? Very accurate, a little accurate, marginally, and then that kind of scale. So that makes a difference. So if we look at the normative here, in contrast to my Ipsative, right? If we look at the first part of that, it's much higher. What does that tell us? Does it tell us anything?
Not necessarily. I'd like to see how you answered the PAPI normative, for example. Were you quite self-inflated or not? Did you mostly choose, yes, that's me? Do you see your preferences in all areas versus not? So the PAPI N and E, to put it next to each other is, a lot of people do put it next to each other, but they are 2 separate tools.
So we'll just look at it this way. I had to play with it and test it. I'm an old graphic freak, so
Yeah.
Okay.
It shows, especially if I see a lot of preferences that are in the top 15 percentile, I know that there are very strong preferences, and that could mean various things. And I think this is important when it comes to personality assessments. There are different stories for the same outcome. And often companies go, based on your personality, and I've never spoken to you, you can't have this job.
Okay.
And I don't think that is very fair, because your story behind inspirational motivator might be different than somebody else's. They are, and now this is where the validity score comes in, around 40, 50%. We can kind of predict what this means. What about the other 50%?
Yeah.
And that's what I like about the PAPI in the wheel. So it is the first tool that I've used where I can have a discussion about someone's results on one piece of paper or on a digital format, where we stick with one profile. We don't go up and down, and we don't go, ooh, and everything is just on one thing, on one screen. And we can start talking about what this means to the person. So the PAPI is designed to be two-phased. One, psychometric test, and then two, the discussion.
Okay.
And we always motivate that happens to.
We'll take a look at it a little bit later on. What I liked about the coaching document that you had, there's no automatic assumptions of what the score means. There's always two sides to the coin. Okay, you can be, for example, totally role focused, but it could also mean, could have the negative question: Are you a workaholic? Do you have no life balance? Or are you just in a phase where that's required of you, and you have work-life balance, or you have life balance, but so there's always and what I like about the coaching model is that it forces the person interviewing or coaching the person to ask those questions. How would you interpret this? What's your justification, right? I did want to give you an example, because I'll hold this into the camera. You get, when you take these tests, you get from Talogy, you get all sorts of different really great documents. One is the PAPI 3I SL feedback form. I'll hold that into the camera, right? And when I looked at it, I said, I have to read this, because I'm not just going to take the test and not see what people. And I went to impact and drive, and I highlighted this. And it said here, which I started laughing, he may not see himself as a natural leader. Okay. The second part of the paragraph, he has described himself as having a very low desire for recognition from others or to draw attention to himself. When working in a group, he's likely to contribute only when he feels that he has something valuable to offer. And I started laughing. That is absolutely not me.
Is that the Ipsative report?
That's the Ipsative report. But hold on, let me back it up. And then I took the Normative thing, and in the same segment, it said exactly this. He said, responses indicate he is likely to be a very confident and effective leader, and he's very likely to feel comfortable when taking formal management roles, and may also take the lead in informal situations. He may, in fact, believe that he is a natural leader. I like the fact that you use the word believe. And I said, now that's me. So some people might say, yeah, but aren't you proving that this model has a flaw? I don't think so, but you're the expert. Why would the I say one and the N say something else? Yeah. Okay, hold on. Stop sharing. We want to see you more. There we go. Go ahead. Should I ask the question again?
No.
Okay. Go ahead.
Gathering my thoughts. This is exactly why you need training on which one to use when.
Yeah.
And when to share a feedback report like this. So I am not a huge fan of sharing the narrative report based on the PAPI, because it is based on what are you interested in versus this is your personality. And I'm very clear about that.
But I wanted to take this because I think you really have to kind of test drive things and be constructively critical. When you put it in that light, if I were to explain it in layman's terms, I am constantly in a position where I naturally have to take the lead. I've always been the person in the room when I'll hold back for like 5-10 minutes, and then everybody's sitting around not willing to take the lead. I will take the lead. It's just in my nature. I can't. And if I have something to say, I'll say it. That's just the way I'm built. But if I were to interpret why does the I question that, I would probably say the reason it questions this and why some of that is ranked lower is because sometimes those of us who do it a lot wish we had to do it less, which makes...
There are more important things to you than taking the lead.
Yeah. So, for me, I don't feel the need to stand on stage because I'm constantly standing on stage. Okay. So, okay. There's some other really, really cool reports that you get out of Talogy as well.
I think, Mark, what you're highlighting is really important, and this is for the consultants out there using psychometric tests and even companies. Be a little bit more critical by just sending out reports without an ear to interpret it. It needs to be understood by the user. And sometimes, and I've seen it often, where reports get sent out, in my years of experience here in South Africa as well, that aren't very clear. The person sits there with a report and goes, oh, is there something wrong with me, and can't talk to anyone about that? And that makes me not just nervous, but other things as well. So that there needs to be a bridge, because it does have impact. And especially people that are a little bit self-critical or quite tough on themselves, they might then start judging things that they shouldn't, and then there's adverse impact, and that's something we should avoid at all times.
But what you kind of do to kind of underline what you've said is those are just kind of the superficial thing. I think a lot of people are always looking for the quick fix. They want to see a graphic, they want to see a spider diagram, and then they want to make their assumptions. And what I liked about your approach is there's a bunch of other reports that are printed out. You have a shorter report, which is the Big Five report, which is this one right here. What I thought was great is the two following ones, which was the interview guide. Okay. Which I think is brilliant because it really breaks down. First of all, I like the fact that in every one of these documents, there's called an introduction. As an American, I would say it's a disclaimer, a legal disclaimer.
We're not responsible.
This report might cause nausea, and it kind of gives you a guideline on what you need, how you need to understand it or read it. But for example, if we're looking at the interview guide, it starts off with an interview guidance. Beginning of the interview, during the interview, after the interview, which I think is brilliant. And then it has on the different areas, for example, openness to ideas. It gives you the score, right? I'm going to show this. Nobody's going to be able to see this in great detail, which is fine. We don't want to give all the magic away. We just want to kind of give the. So you have the different areas, and then you have interview questions. I'm like, how brilliant is that? They actually give you the questions. I think a lot of interviewers who do this can probably figure out the questions themselves. But if you're new to this, it gives you some interview questions to start off with. And then I thought what was also brilliant, second side, right, is this part right here where it says, listen, we all know what to assume means. To assume means to make an ass out of you and me. And to avoid that thing, what it does on the backside of the scoring, it gives you positive indicators or negative indicators, which was kind of what we were talking about, right? So what were we looking at here so that the listener can kind of figure it out? If we're talking about openness to ideas, right? So I have for focuses on practicalities, wary of new ideas, evaluates ideas on their merits. So I have my score kind of in the middle. And then it has both positive potential indicators and negative ones, right? So one is open to new suggestions and approaches, dismisses new suggestions and approaches. And it doesn't automatically say what it is, but it gives the interviewer an opportunity to ask some questions and take some notes. Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, I think what makes we call it the CBIC, the competency-based interview guide, and it's based on the PAPI, which means that it gives the interviewer the ability to say, you have described yourself as with a strong preference of working with others. Can you give me an example of? So you gave me this information, now prove that, or give me an example of that. So the interview questions are a little bit more specific. And then we have the complete creativity and freedom to build development and interview guides for companies based on their competency frameworks, their values, their leadership, etc. And then we even change the questions based on exactly what they're looking for.
Now,
so it's a really nice product.
You guys offer these services. You could do these interviews. You could do these coachings. But what you actually do is you certify different people within organizations so they can use these models as well.
Yes.
And I'm assuming that the very first benefit that comes to mind is, look, there's 5 million different ways to ask questions. Okay. There's, I don't know how many different frameworks that you could make up, but this is a solid framework that relieves me of the stress of creating something that's stable and valid. And I can use it, and it'll give me a framework. I can change the questions if I want. But it saves me a lot of time. And if you train people within the company, what I'm assuming is one of the absolute benefits of this interview guide is, and this is something I think that often falls to the wayside, partly because of the stresses of modern day working and also because of home office and all that kind of stuff. It's a great way to get to know people.
Oh, yeah. I've had great interviews using the PAPI. I've had great interviews with other tools, but I really love the wheel.
Yeah.
Because it tells a story and everything's connected and everything's on one page. And I've learned so much from people, and everyone is different. So in that way, this tool is really great. Yeah.
And I would assume that for the interviewee, although I'm sure there might be some apprehension, perhaps, especially with the present wave of layoffs. I think, and this is a quote from John Maxwell, I think one of the questions that an employee asks, whether they respect and want to follow a leader, is, does this leader care about me? And asking real questions shows that you care. And I think that's the benefit of the person that's being interviewed. So I think that's a great concept. Then there's one more report. What's the big difference between the interview guide and the coaching report? Sorry to pick your brain here, but this is all.
Sure.
So then they just hold this in the mirror. This is the biggest one. This is like a whopping, how many pages? This is 40 pages?
Yeah, this includes everything. So for jobs, we can only highlight the competencies that are necessary for the role. So the report will be shorter. We just sent you the full thing. The coaching report breaks down each scale and each competency into positive and negative indicators, and positive and negatives for each.
So not
of the
positive, negative determinants. You're not determining one or the other. You're just saying this is where you need to look.
Exactly. Yeah, it could potentially be, etc. This is the 50%, 50% certainty of, look, we've seen this before. Go explore, but the other 50% is up to the person. And I think regardless of what tool you use, you should go and play detective, because we are so wonderful and complex. And that should be taken into consideration.
You have potential motivators in here, potential strengths, potential development areas. It's brilliant. And let's face it, this is maybe not, so the algorithms and the studies behind it might be rocket science, but the report itself, our understanding, is not rocket science, but it just takes so much work out of your hands and gives you a framework to work with, which I think is great. There's a couple other reports. There's a job interview guide. I guess that's when you're interviewing something. And then there's a motivator, demotivator report. What's that?
That just highlights your main motivators and demotivators based on your skills output.
So I know when to use the electroshocker and when, as we say in German, Zuckerbrot und Peitsche, with candies and whip. Yeah, the carrot and the stick.
Yeah,
okay.
Look, there are so many reports that are out there, but most people use maybe 2 or 3 of them.
Okay.
Because they use them often, and I also just use 2 or 3 of them, really. If I want a bit more insight, and especially if I'm new, the motivators and demotivators is nice as a snapshot of preparing yourself for what to look out for, etc., and a lot of other things, but it can also be overwhelming. The report options, and there are many. So make sure that you don't overwhelm yourself when you give feedback as well. Pick the things that work for you, to give the candidate the best opportunity to show themselves.
Yeah.
That I think is still in the foreground. Whatever you need to do to do that, then you won.
So we have kind of a tall order in this podcast. It's always the challenge when you're talking to people who are making decisions or are hearing something for the first time. You want to keep it simple, but the problem is if you keep it simple, you lack a lot of the depth, and if you go into depth, you lose the big picture, right? So I would probably say we're doing a moderate job, and that's I'll take the responsibility for maybe making people understand the PAPI model completely. I think we think we might have gotten their attention and we might have gotten their interest. We don't know if we've gotten the desire and action yet, but we can work on that. And I'm gonna pick up an adage because I'm really thrilled that you've taken the time to sit down with me and talk about this, because I truly believe that leaders are constantly looking for things that will make their life easy. It's not going to relieve us of the work that needs to be done, but it should carry us further down the road if we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And the wheel that we invent is not as good as the wheels that exist. So one of the things I like to do, and I take this from a German saying. I don't know if you're familiar with this German saying. I think it's probably more Austrian than it is German. In Austria, we say, when you're trying to explain something, somebody important who needs to make a decision, you need to explain it to them as if they're 7 years old, a housewife, a houseman, or a board member. Now, board members could theoretically get offended by this, but it kind of ties into the nature of their job. They're at the tip of the pyramid, so there's few of them. They have to know everything, a little bit about everything, which makes life difficult, and they have to be able to focus. So this concept of elevator pitch is important. I'm also going to use the classical NLP approach. If you want to make somebody interested in something, give them a kind of, put them in a storyline into a concept that they can listen to, and even if they don't understand it 100%, they feel it. So I'd like to try this with you. If I were the CEO of a mid-sized company based in German-speaking DACH region, right? Germany, Austria, Switzerland. Mm-hmm. And let's say I have 4 different locations and over 1,000 employees. And I feel the need, because it's difficult to get resources at the moment. You know, good people are hard to find. And I want to provide a healthy environment where I attract the right resources and I can develop them as well and create loyalty and commitment to my company. And I went to Talogy, right? What would be the process and how would you be able to help me in that process? Kind of maybe talk us through what would be the preliminary steps, what would be the follow-up steps if you guided us through a process of maybe a year? What would something like that look like?
Well, thank you for your question, CEO Mark. It really depends on your budget and what you want. So
I'm going to do a cultural answer here.
I think the answer is very simple. The more information you have about the hires, the better you can onboard them, the better you can develop them in their positions, as well as increase how a person goes into the job as well. Do you take the time to get to know me? How do the feedback situations look like? What is the experience for that employee is extremely important nowadays. And now we're talking about top talent, right? The ones that have options and that have offers on the table. How are we going to get them? As in, you are important to me. We are going to look at various aspects that the job requires, as well as who you are. How can we invest in that? And personality assessments will give you those answers. You can do that in different formats, through a guided interview, through assessments and feedback, through...
Let's say I'm on board. What would be the process that we would go through? I'm hiring you guys. I guess what I kind of hear out of what you're saying, if I have, 1,000, 3,000, 500, 1,000, whatever, how many employees I have, we would probably have to pick out the focus group. Or the question is, are we doing all of my employees? Is that a possibility to do all your employees?
To assess for new positions?
Well, I mean, you can use the PAPI system not only for new hires, you could use it as for developing, right?
So the process, I would imagine, would be to start talking to your talent development department.
HR.
We want to understand your talent framework. We want to understand your talent DNA, your values, your leadership model, your potential model, etc. From that, we build solutions based on how to sift and select for those, keeping those in mind, because those are important. That's why you're successful. As well as look towards future competencies that you need to remain successful, and build that into a selection strategy that can be used. And this tool can be used in various functions for that.
So you would do a needs analysis to say, okay, who's the target group?
Yes.
Is it for new hires? Is it for developing? What are your basic needs? And when we establish that, the next process would be to take that segment, either all of the employees or a segment of the employees, and put them through an assessment, right?
Depending on the need. So if you want to develop a whole group, are we talking about group workshops, team effectiveness interventions? Are we looking at self-insight, etc.? That all really depends. So everything comes back to, and I always ask this with clients as well, what is the output that you desire? And we design backwards rather than forwards. I want to reach the output that you desire, and I will challenge you on that output as well.
Okay.
What does that actually mean? The 5 whys really work well here.
Yeah. So if I say, I don't know, we want to grow. We're in the process of buying up another company and we want to become dominant in the marketplace. That would be the desired outcome that I want. I guess you would do in the needs analysis, you would say, okay, what are the skill sets that you need? How would you evaluate them? At what level are they on? Do you have a development
and then there's
program?
2 companies coming together. How do you manage that?
Yeah.
How do you manage that? You can also use these tools for that.
Okay.
So it really depends. There's actually so much, not creativity, but you do really need to think with your client on what the output and needs are. And then you start putting different offers on the table. If it is just automated reporting, or if it is just increasing the candidate experience of going through an assessment and getting immediate feedback through the system, or if it really is coaching sessions, how does that look like? That everything is on the table.
So your services go from analysis, evaluation of analysis, train the trainer as a kind of a term that would you be used. You would actually do coaching sessions for team development, conflict resolution. If I'm going into a large project, you could probably assess whether we have the right capabilities.
Those are skills. That is not something we do in talent management. So skills assessments are different. That's a different animal.
Okay.
But we can link to the general skills assessments. There's a client I'm working with, a global client. We're looking at their talent framework, as well as their potential model, their leadership models, different levels, and different impacts on different countries, etc. How does that look like? And then how do you measure that, and how do you make it? How do you put that on a piece of paper, and how do you communicate that to the business, etc.? So there is a lot of complexity in that. It's a fun place to be, but there are a lot of turning wheels here. But everything comes back to what's the output you want? What do you want to desire? If that's very clear, then we build solutions around that. But it's really all about creating awareness about behavior, talent analytics, giving you more insights about your employee. Who are your top performers? Who are your potentials that are overlooked, etc. Everything is possible because we took the abstract and we put it on paper.
Do you have reoccurring services that are held if you have a long-standing client, held maybe once a year or whatever the interval might be?
Recurring services, can you clarify that?
For example, I'll give you a different example. I once worked for the large Canadian international company that had, for example, it's a different ball of yarn, but it had every 2 years they would have employees survey their management. Okay, like I said, it's a different objective, but that was the interval, and we had a consulting firm that was specialized in that kind of assessment and provided the tools for it, and the interval was every 2 years. So that was kind of the guiding process. It was kind of part of our culture. It's something we expected. People were familiar with it, right? So there was a relationship also to the company, to the models that. Is that something you guys do as well?
The best example I can think of is a 360, and we have various 360s. Okay. So some of the clients I manage, we go yearly and do 360s and management reports, and the whole thing, and feed that back to the board to say this is your leadership team at the moment. These are the development areas for next year, and we feed that back into talent management, and then they can design their next interventions better. So that is the 360. That there are a lot of tools. Yeah.
Outside of PAPI that you guys offer as well.
Yeah. So the PAPI, we also have emotional intelligence, which is hugely popular at the moment. Maybe for a later stage, Mark, I'll show you. And then there's personality. Then there's modular solutions, and there are higher solutions. There's sift and select solutions. We've got the full profile. PAPI really is one of our main and flagship tools, absolutely. But we have others as well.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Let me ask you another question. We kind of led into this conversation. I'm not joking, at least once a year, the subject matter of coaching teams using my coaching function or guiding functions will be a client says, listen, we're putting together a team for a large project that's going to last for 2 years. And I want to make sure that we're using, we have the right team put together, and we're kind of going through the classical Tuckman model of forming, storming, norming. And we use the Belbin test to make sure we have the right diversity of people. And I also have personal interest because it keeps coming across my radar. I'll sit down and go to Amazon and I'll start putting in the terms. I'll put in Penta model, and I'll put in Enneagram and the ENFG, whatever the heck it is, and I'll put it in there. And I never find any books. Are there books that for anybody who's interested, anybody who's been listening to this podcast says, you know what, I don't have 100% transparency, but it's interesting. Are there any particular books that you can recommend that we can actually find somewhere, perhaps on Amazon, that might help people in this process?
Not really, Mark.
Okay.
And I know that there are many books on personality, like you can see, but they're all for academics.
Okay.
So they're written for academics as well. If you don't have the background, it's going to be difficult to understand. And I think the main reason is, and I looked at the personality, so I've got a book on the Enneagram, but the assessment is part of it. So you can do the assessment in the book and then read your profiles, or there's a personality type indicator. The assessment is part of the book. How can you read a book about something that is theoretical about a model that you don't have access to? So I think that could be one of the reasons. And the second one is there might just not be a very big market, or these companies are overlooking a huge market for them. So, yeah. I see there's an uptake on podcasts and on, a lot of psychologists are now starting to talk about things. So I think that is the next thing. And we are going and moving even further away from books. So I don't think
yes, some people are still moving away from books, but I think those that are in the know still understand the value of books. I think that, and that was a question I was going to ask you as well. I think that AI can, and podcasts and other things can help you abbreviate, but the real in-depth thing is you still get through a book. And this is kind of the nature of what the Cowboy is trying to do. I think everybody's interested in lofty and attractive ideas, but at the end of the day, they're not worth anything unless I can make them happen. If I say, you know what, I envision it would be really great to ride in a cowboy saddle on a big horse across the meadow, and that looks great, and I'm sure it feels great, but I don't know how to put on a saddle, and I don't know the basics of riding. I'm not going to be able to implement what I'm desiring. So I think there is in all. I'm going to take one step back. I have you've seen at least part of my library when we were online last time. One thing I love about books is they're a great way to kind of pick up ideas and spend a little bit more time digesting them. But one of the things that I would lament about a lot of literature is a lot of books tell you what you need. And I don't think that the broad population of business practitioners need other people to tell them what to do. We hear it every day, what we need. How to do it, as stupid as this might sound. Give me a roadmap. It's not going to match my context 100%, but that's kind of what I was asking you. If I were to reach out to you as a professional or your company, what would the process look like? Because I think as long as we've got this kind of ambiguous kind of, I kind of feel that it might be good, but I don't know what it's going to be like. If I can't paint it out, if I can't give you a step-by-step process of this is step number 1, this is step number 2, even if those steps have to be adapted as we go, that gives you safety, that gives you security. In fact, I'm quoting one of the things you said last week in our seminar where we all got certified according to PAPI. You said that I forget what context it was, but you said that one of the things that this does, it creates a sense of reliability and trust in the model if it's transparent and understandable. Okay.
Yes.
So that's kind of what I'm hoping we'll achieve, at least to a certain extent, with this pod. Are there any other books that are separate of the models that you as a crossover, because you're kind of a liaison between the business world and the psychological world. Are there any really good books out there that you would recommend to our readers, for those of them who still read?
I really find the books that aren't written by the psychologists quite good.
How about
unless you're a Peterson fan, and so psychology is often referred to as a religion. There are different schools of thoughts within psychology, so you'll have psychologists talking about the same thing with different point of views. So there's always then they are the behaviorist school of thought, or they are the cognitive school of thought, and then you get all kinds of very smart people especially in the brain research that they're doing, like Huberman, for example.
I love Huberman.
But like people like Dan Pink.
Oh, I love Dan Pink.
Those guys and they're extremely good. They take the complexity of psychology and they just simplify it a little bit.
Very American.
In our industry, psychologists aren't very good at doing that.
Yeah.
So we like being in the cloud of mystery.
You like to keep it academic.
Yeah, psychologists are academics.
Yeah.
That's why you don't get those. But those types of people I find more influential in our field, even though they're not psychologists, but they make things actionable.
Yeah. What about John Strelicky and Big Five for Life? That kind of goes into. Are you familiar with him?
No,
okay.
I'm not. But I have a friend in the UK who wrote a book about the Big Five. The thing with personality is we need to experience it to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I've read a lot of books on psychology and human behavior, but I've learned by seeing extreme behaviors to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So when I did my work in prisons in South Africa, for example, I understood what a psychopath actually looks like versus what people say, oh, my boss is a psychopath. Or when I worked in post-clinic institutes, what depression really looks like, or what anxiety really looks like, or what you have to experience it. Or that's how I learned a lot, is just through experience. So reading a book is one thing, but just
Yeah. You open up another topic. Well, since I have a psychologist who's also in business, you two hot topics. One, the mental health issue in the workplace today. What is your stance or perception of that right now?
Real concern. Yeah. A lot of my clients, and I speak to a lot of people, I am a little bit concerned. Not just a little bit, I am very concerned. Even the digital workplace is overloading people more. We're dealing with more complexity. AI is pushing the complexity level even higher, and we're not meant for this kind of stuff. So I can see more burnout now. I can see anxiety. I can see depression, and just the general overwhelmed feeling I'm seeing more and more. So even last year already, I saw this year is going to be a resilience year. So that is going to be another topic, just resilience on its own, which we also assess, by the way. Is a hot topic at the moment. And if it continues at this trajectory, I would predict more fallout to come. Yeah.
Okay.
Because we're just not connected to each other anymore. There's the whole thing, but I am just concerned. Yeah.
Another hot topic, which I have been following for many decades. I once read, if you want to read a harrowing but very interesting book on psychology, the premier psychologist from the U.S. Army, I forget what his name is, taught at West Point, wrote a book called On Killing.
Mm-hmm.
I won't go into the whole psychology of that, but it's very interesting and actually says a lot about humanity, which is positive. But he talks, there's one excerpt in there that will always be emblazoned in my mind and has followed me over the decades, since I interact with both teams that are being led and complain about their leaders, and leaders who are trying to push the envelope and complain about their workers. I'm kind of in the in-between. And he was talking about the concept of psychopathy. And I'm gonna massacre the scientific element of this, but this is basically what he said. He was talking about a concept that there's obviously psychopaths and sociopaths are a minority in society. I forget what the percentage was that he used for psychopathy. I think it was 8%. And he kind of came up with this concept that said I don't think this is accurate numbers. He said half of them, so 4% of them are negative psychopaths, and half of them are what he would deem positive psychopaths. And what he basically did, he used also a trait-based assessment of them. One of the things that psychopaths are good at is they're good at making decisions. Okay, they're good at divining. If I've got two different options, okay, if I'm doing the I circle of PAPI, I know which answer to give right away, and I can live with the consequences. And he denoted the difference between positive and negative is that positive psychopaths are work according to this because of the need, but when they return to society, they are integrated and normal. They don't feel the need to do drastic things. It's just a I don't know what the term would be, a kind of a reflexive thing. And the other ones, they thrive off of it. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this is a hot topic I would love to maybe cover in another podcast. Is I've seen statistics that say, number one, there's an over proportion of sociopaths and psychopaths in jail. You look at the general population, number one.
Yes.
And I'm going to ask you, you'll probably know where I'm going with it. Where's the second group where they're over proportionately represented?
Depends how they were measured. A lot of the measures that are supposed to test psychopaths are very questionable.
Okay,
like
that's interesting. That's interesting.
So there's that one thing. I've worked with psychopaths in the prisons in South Africa. And the theories, and I've read up on that as well, just to prepare myself. But psychopaths or true psychopaths won't survive in a corporate environment. The corporate environment will pick them up very quickly because they are not effective.
Okay.
Effectiveness is very strongly linked to emotional intelligence. The psychopaths and the serial killers that I've worked with are fascinating. So you will have in prison, they'll walk up to me and go, "Do you know who I am?" And I go, "No." And I'll go, "Well, I don't know if you've heard of me, but I did X, Y, Z." It's very important for them to know who they are. But once you start talking to them, their communication isn't very clear. It's not crisp, very easily distracted, etc. They wouldn't make it in corporate unless you're a business owner, unless you got somehow to the top without having to go through different screening processes, maybe.
There are a number of books, I don't know how scientific they are, that say the second population where sociopaths and psychopaths are overrepresentative is in upper management and politics.
Upper management is extremely difficult to get to as a psychopath.
Yeah?
If you're a psychopath,
sociopaths
they are
more?
destructive. They maybe parts of the psychopath pyramid.
Well,
so
we have some that manage to become president.
Not true psychopaths.
I don't know who I'm talking about, but
there's a really nice thing I read the other day, and it says that if you want to be brilliant, there's a fine line that you walk between knowing that you can be absolutely destructive or creative. So in my work in South Africa, I've learned, and we can see it, that people have the absolute ability to destroy and to create. In Central Europe, the focus is more positive. Everyone is valuable. Everyone,
at least outwardly, yeah.
Yeah. In South Africa, you can see both so much clearer. But a true leader knows how destructive they can be and understands their dark side. So we all have that dark side, but decides not to use it. Versus this positive thing that we're seeing at the moment is you're wonderful, you're great, but not recognizing the dark side of the destruction. I think the psychopaths that I've worked with had no value for self and no value for others. And that is because they were never treated as valuable ever. Now just imagine or empathize with the psychopath. I have no value if I die, I don't care. Versus if someone else dies, I don't care because they have no value. That's different. And you would not survive in corporate with the mindset like that.
So I like this conversation because I'm talking to somebody who's actually learned this, and I'm just, like I said, a layman, and I pick these things up. I would say, though, that I am voicing a concern that I see, not in all companies, but in a number of different companies. And maybe I'm just using the wrong word. Maybe the word sociopath and psychopath is misplaced, although I think they're they're easy to market if you're writing a book. I think there's a bunch of different books that
True.
talk about this. But maybe because the people who are writing these books and reading them are laymen or laywomen, is there another psychological term? Is the term narcissist a better one? What do you kind of sense what I'm talking about? The issue that we have,
maladaptive behaviors is what
there's certain traits that people that have I don't know if the word abnormal is correct, but a little bit outliers in the social behavior are the ones that tend to make it to the top. And I think part of it stems from their ability to make difficult decisions quickly, not worrying about what other people think, and a heightened, almost histrionic self-aggrandizing concept of themselves. One thing that I often like
Mark, I would challenge you on that.
Yeah?
So imagine you walk into the room and you get the full red carpet treatment every day of your life. People literally look at you and say, when does Mark need a coffee? When do you need a cappuccino? Do you need anything? I'm constantly there for you. Now, how are you going to feel in 3 months if you get this treatment all the time?
So you're saying if I lived on the Geneva Lake and in a huge villa and had a chauffeur and people would be standing at attention every time I walk in, that I might not be a narcissist when I started working with a company, but I will be when I'm finished?
Yeah, exactly.
So I think it's totally interesting that you're turning the tables here and saying, is it the question of what I'm going in as or what the system makes me?
I think that we don't understand what power corrupts us. Mm-hmm. We are absolutely corruptible. I always find it interesting. Some leaders understand that power, but choose not to use that. That's what I was talking about. That makes a truly exceptional leader. I can be, but the pressure that these CEOs are under. And when I do a 360 feedback to CEOs, for example, the pressure that they are under is extreme. So,
absolutely. I have absolute empathy for them.
Yeah. So what happens is when we are under extreme pressure, one of our coping mechanisms is dissociation. So this is reality. This is dissociation. I'm going to create an alternate universal reality where my ego can deal with the pressures, dissociating. That's where multiple personality disorder comes from. Mm-hmm. That's actually called a dissociated personality disorder. So dissociation is something we do all the time when you're under pressure or you need to put on your Mark face. You need to bring out that presence. Sometimes we dissociate into that identity. The higher you go up in the organization and the more pressure you feel, the more likely, and now I'm going to have people disagree with me, I'm sure, you are to dissociate to be able to do your job.
Yeah, it's kind of like being a doctor. You can't fall apart every time one of your patients dies.
Exactly. And that can be perceived as behavior that from someone from bottom looking up doesn't understand. And if we don't understand something, what do? We label it so that we can grab it and we can hold that. But trust me, I've worked with psychopaths. They would not be able to run a company. They would be too destructive.
I love this feedback because it sharpens my understanding of it, although it throws up questions as well. What you're basically saying, okay, sociopaths and psychopaths are not really the ones that make it to the top. There's other factors, and that the system has part of the cause that creates the effect.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Correct.
How do you? I mean, I think you have a wonderful South African example. If you look at some of the politicians that you have now in South Africa, and I don't want to. By the way, for any South Africans listening, I don't want to paint you in a bad light. We've got plenty of other crappy politicians all over the world. But since you're South African, I'll refer to this. I mean, that your absolute beacon figure is Nelson Mandela. I think a person who's gone through all sorts of trials and tribulation. But at the end of the day, I think there's a unanimous statement that he was an outstanding, humble humanitarian that led not because necessarily wanted to be up front, but because he fulfilled a role. And if we're looking at some of the people that followed in his footsteps, you have issues of corruption, taking advantage of the system. Do you have any statements of what can a society or an organization do to to create an environment where not just our employees are sound and capable, but maybe also our C-level is sound? And that might be a question that's too difficult to answer. But any thoughts on that?
South Africa is a difficult topic. It's a beautiful country, great people, and I've worked with many cultures there, and I completely understand all the views, and they are all kind of justified, all of them, and that's the problem. I've worked with the psychologist that did an assessment with Mandela before they were released. So they actually tested Mandela to see if he would be a risk or not. But what Mandela did, and that's exactly what I was saying, is that he had this influence and power, but decided not to use it. He opened the box and said, okay, let's talk about racism. And ask any South African, and we can openly talk about it because we've been taught by Mandela and his leadership on how to do that, which I think is fantastic. But power corrupts. And if there are no consequences, then then I would suspect that most people are corruptible.
So you've already given us one bullet point that I would flag on how, because my ultimate question would be, if we were to learn from examples like Nelson Mandela or put it into a business context, what can society or organizations do to create an environment where we don't have leaders who are acting inappropriately? So one would be hold them accountable, which I think we have a culture that is lacking in all sorts of different. Accountability, transparency would be two different things. Any other ideas that you might want to add to that?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because they also are apart for a reason. So to flatten the whole organization and open all boxes is going to cause so much uncertainty that the lower levels that need the structure are not going to be able to cope. So there is reason and structure. I would question why people feel that their leaders have maladaptive behaviors in the first place, or is there something else going on? And a great exercise, and we've done this, was a leaderless group exercise. So you open a room, you put a bunch of leaders in there, and you give them almost no instructions whatsoever. And you kind of sit there as an assessor, and you see them self-organize and structure. And within 30 minutes, they've almost selected a leader. They've reorganized the room on who sits together. They've already come up with rules of engagement. We are structured animals by nature.
I'll often say that when we talk about flat organizations or agile organizations, I said that all has a place and there's a value to it, but the most effective and efficient form of organizational structure for a large organization is the functional line organization. It's been that way since 10,000 years, and it will be 10,000 years from now. There's a certain, because of the role distribution, there's a vertical distribution of responsibility, and quite honestly, not everybody wants to be at the top.
Yes.
You know, there's a trade-off. It's not just all, coffee, peaches, and cream. It's difficult. It's sleepless nights. It's a lot of work. It's anxiety out the wazoo. It's no life balance whatsoever. So there's always two sides of the coin here.
Well, anger is a lazy emotion. So it's what we said in prison. It's anger is lazy, and it blankets what you're actually feeling. But if an employee says, "Oh, but it's management," there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, I think.
And yes, maybe it's management, but there are different sides to the coin there.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I also believe that structure creates security and safety. And then how that is communicated, I think, is a big deal. Yeah.
Karina, we've gone through quite a bit. I thank you for your patience with my attempt of trying to digest this and also portray it to our viewers so that they can understand it. Thanks a lot for your engagement and for your participation. And I wish you the best. What any other projects that you're looking at in the near future?
Oh gosh, I'm working on many projects, but right now I'm focusing on how to highlight potential and what does potential mean, and I think that's quite interesting.
Okay,
so keep me updated.
Well, we'll put a link with your contact information on LinkedIn for anybody who wants to reach out to you and get more questions that we haven't answered. And once again, thanks a lot for your time. Thanks, Karina.
Thank you, Mark.
All the best. Bye-bye.